Welcome to today's live talk, everyone. This is the latest in a series of expert dialogues brought to you by Bayer. Our topic today is a natural resource essential for all life on Earth and in increasingly short supply, namely water. My name is Melinda Crane, and it is my pleasure to accompany you today as moderator. We're very glad to have you with us, no matter what time zone you're joining us from. Internationally, we have made progress in increasing access to clean water, yet 40% of the world's people are already enduring water scarcity, and up to 60% will do so by 2050. That's due not only to the droughts and heat waves caused by climate change, but also to soaring demand from growing populations, cities, and economies, and most especially to poor water management resulting from what you might call water blindness. Both corporations and many of us, much of the public, turn a blind eye to the fundamental importance of the world's rivers, lakes, and wetlands for nearly every aspect of our lives. If we continue on our current trajectory, we are going to fail to meet the water-related sustainable development goals with grave potential consequences. For example, for human health, think of how important access to clean water, sanitation, and hygiene have been for preventing the spread of diseases like COVID. For harvests, a critical shortage of water could trigger both food shortages and mass migration. And for climate adaptation and societal resilience as a whole, which is why today we want to discuss how we can change track and join forces to truly and effectively fight the water crisis. We have two outstanding experts with us to explore the pressing challenges and the potential solutions. Stuart Orr is a global thought leader on water stewardship. He joined the World Wildlife Fund in 2006, and he currently leads WWF's global freshwater work, driving the strategy and research activities related to its global work on water. A member of numerous high-level advisory panels, he recently joined Nestlé's Creating Shared Value Council, which helps guide that company on its sustainable journey. Today, he joins us from Switzerland. Welcome, Stuart. Great to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Melinda. Great to be here. Thank you.
And Matthias Berninger is a regular on these live talks. He's Executive Vice President for Public Affairs, Science, Sustainability, and HSE. That stands for Health, Safety, and Environment at Bayer, and he's responsible for the group's global sustainability initiative, within which protection of water as a natural resource plays a central role. Today, you're joining us from Washington, D.C. Great to see you again, Matthias.
Happy Friday, Melinda. Great to be here.
Thank you so much. Dear audience, a very quick note before we start our discussion. We are very eager to hear from you. So please send us your questions using the comment tab on this live stream, and I will bring in the questions a little bit later on. So my first question goes to Stuart. Okay. Many of us see water all around us every day and tend to take it for granted. It's transparent, it's invisible. Clearly, that's not how you see it. Can you tell us what drives your long-standing commitment to freshwater management and how your work at the WWF has shaped your thinking about water as a resource?
Okay, yeah, great question. So I think, first of all, to me, and I think to many people, water is just absolutely fascinating. And I got the bug in college when I studied on water, and it never let go. To me, the most iconic and beautiful landscapes in the world are rivers, lakes, and wetland systems. And of course, I've learned a lot more over that time about the incredible biodiversity that lives in them and relies on them, of course. Obviously, I'm also driven by the human stories, the economic stories of water. So my personal passion is really that connection to rivers and their immense beauty. I think that's the personal side of it. But as you've noted, Melinda, once you realize that rivers, lakes, and wetlands are basically the foundations for governments, you know, the role that they play in our lives and our economies, our societies, and then you start thinking about the trade-offs and the decisions we all have to make. It's just a fascinating arena to work in. So it gives me great pleasure. I came to WWF, as you say, in 2006. I was hired to come and look at corporate work on water. It was starting to emerge as an issue. And I was brought in to see, hey, what was our strategy be with engaging the private sector on this? And during that time, I've been very happy to be part of a number of initiatives and tools and opportunities, groups that have been created around this whole environment and world. And I think what's important to me is that we don't frame water as a protect versus development argument, and that is that some people think that we can't have both, and actually we can have both. We can develop our economies and our societies and our businesses and take good care of the ecosystems that we rely on. So I think to your last point, what are the views that have shaped my understanding in WWF are so many experiences over the years of working with so many different people and understanding their lens and their viewpoint on water, because everybody has their own understanding of this. But I think that holistic understanding of water in its entirety allows us and my team to engage people in that entirety of water and then work back from there.
Thank you very much. And lovely that you started out with the beauty of water. I have to say, I entirely share that perspective, although I might want to add oceans, salt water to the list. Matthias, the protection of all natural resources is an integral part of Bayer's commitment towards sustainable development. Can you tell us concretely what role water plays in your daily work as Executive Vice President for Sustainability?
Half of our business is in agriculture. And agriculture at the moment consumes roughly 70% of all fresh water. So for us to produce food and fibers requires access to fresh water. And when you do materiality analysis, what are the really strategic topics that could cause a problem for your business? You can't help but thinking about water. And for too long, we have been taking access to water for granted. But when you look around at a metric like soil moisture, you realize that in places where Bayer has a very strong presence, be it Australia, we discussed with Mina about the situation in Australia at another time, be it the Midwest or the west of the United States, be it South America, in this case, Brazil, Argentina, the Middle East, everybody sees that. Wherever you look, you realize that soil moisture is something that is on the decline. There are only a few places in the world where it's the other way around. And then you have to ask yourself the question, okay, 10 years out, 15 years out, what does that mean for your business? So the connection of water and food insecurity is something that I had like in my head as a general fact. But the intensity of that connection and the dependence we have on solving the water crisis in order to be able to ensure food security for soon 8 billion people is one of the few topics that keeps me up at night.
Stuart, your work is all about valuing rivers and freshwater ecosystems as a whole, including their crucial importance for biodiversity. Now, I mentioned water blindness earlier on. Do you have the sense that in general, corporations are getting the message and starting to see the value of water?
A great question. I think I've been working with the private sector on this agenda for about 2 decades, and I would say that it's patchy. I mean, that's probably the best way to put it. There are definitely some sectors and some companies that have been first movers on this issue and have been paying attention to it for some time. But I would suggest that the vast majority of companies, including those with immense water footprints, have little or no sense of the very real risks they have of water scarcity or to pollution or flooding events, for example. So I think we've still got a very, very long way to go. And that's often very surprising because that's in the face of great materiality. There's tremendous evidence out there of the disruption to business, the capex costs for companies into water. These have been the top of global agendas for over a decade. Water scarcity has sat right at the very top, and yet the response from companies has not been in step with that sense of urgency. So I think we are pushing the value of water, obviously. I think that the lack of market signals to companies doesn't help, but therefore they need to embrace other understandings of value in order to understand the best decisions to be made. So I would say it's slow and patchy, Melinda, but hopefully getting stronger.
Thank you. And can I just ask you, not only in regard to the economics and to the business perspective, but in general, with your very long experience in this field and in the face of that rising water scarcity that Matthias described, what particularly concerns you? Matthias told us that this sometimes keeps him up at night. What keeps you up at night when it comes to fresh water?
Well, I'm obviously very sensitive to the human stories of water. I mean, that was what brought me into the whole water story, was that connection between people and water. But obviously, working for a biodiversity conservation organization, our focus is on freshwater biodiversity. Unfortunately, the biodiversity situation in water, in rivers globally, freshwater systems, is terrible. And we track terrestrial, marine, and freshwater species decline. And we have lost 80% of abundance since we've been recording since the early 1970s. We have extinction rates that are much, much higher than natural extinction rates. And so, of course, for us, the loss of incredible freshwater biodiversity is a concern, and not just because of their beauty. This is also the food security of hundreds of millions of people. This is jobs, livelihoods. This is economies. This is very important treasures that these countries have. And some of the species, when you really understand what we're talking about and these incredible systems and who relies on them. Again, we can talk about the species in the rivers, but all those animals and creatures that rely on water otherwise. So I'm driven by that. Obviously, that agenda by itself doesn't cut it. I'm not going to be able to stop a really bad hydropower project or convince a company that they need to work on water because they're worried about fish. I understand that. So I have to embed my concerns in their concerns, and hopefully mutually we can understand and find out that actually what we both need is the same thing. We need water very well managed, and we need to protect our ecosystems.
I want to come back in a bit and hear a few examples of how you do that kind of work. But let me go first back to Matthias. And you mentioned it, Matthias and Stuart did as well, the fact that companies are finding that increasing water scarcity is directly affecting their activities. Can you give us specific examples of what that means for Bayer and how Bayer is in fact reacting?
I mean, for example, our customers, growers in the American West, let's say in the look at the Colorado River Basin as an example. We see the picture of Lake Mead and kind of falling water levels. Just recently, the originally kind of freshwater supply for Las Vegas and other parts of that region, which is from 1971. Was visible to us because the river level went down to a level that this kind of first kind of valve, so to speak, for freshwater supply was everybody could see it. I mean, we now see like victims of mafia crimes suddenly kind of showing up in all these kind of things. So for me, Lake Mead is an example for not only the water crisis, but also a measurement for how climate change is having a long-term impact. Now, our customers, people that grow cotton, that grow vegetables, that grow row crops, that depend on that Colorado River Basin, have less and less opportunities to do business. And when you face an acute water crisis, it's very interesting. Always the first who are facing it are farmers. That could be large and wealthy farmers or poor smallholders. The second usually is that electricity, water hydropower-driven electricity goes down the drain. And then the third thing is the cities face it. Yeah, and we can see this playing out in rich and in poor countries. So very concretely, the foundation, we can sell a lot to farmers. We can sell crop protection, seeds, digital services. We cannot sell water. The very foundation of their business and thus our business is going away. And in some places at a pace that is unprecedented. So really nobody has an idea how to prepare for that. Changing rainfall patterns for smallholder farmers, for example, in Eastern and West Africa, wipe out generations of traditional knowledge and intuition how to farm. And that is, I think, one of the core things everybody who's worried about climate change has to remember. Water is the molecule through which climate change is expressing itself. There is this connection, and that's why this competition between the water question and the climate question when it comes to conferences, what to talk about, is one of those things I find very upsetting, because there is no competition. This is one of the same topics. These are two sides of the same coin. CO2 and H2O are both basically expressing the same problem.
Yeah. So if as a devil's advocate, I were to say to you, well, isn't this a business opportunity for Bayer to simply sell more drought-resistant seeds? Clearly, that isn't the point of view that the company's taking. But to what extent can you and do you work with farmers themselves to try to inculcate or foster good water management practices?
I think it is a business opportunity. I think that I have this old-fashioned belief that when you're able to solve a problem, there's usually also a good business involved in that. And for companies, I'm always suspicious of companies who go like, oh yeah, business opportunity, let's not talk about it. So I think it has to be a business opportunity to deal with water in a better way. That's why, for example, what many companies like Bayer are doing, establishing an internal price for carbon, is something we should also consider for water. And we have a team working exactly on that. What is the right pricing mechanism for water? We can't wait for governments to do that. This is something, it is in our control to start to put a value to water, something we are working on. But you got to get it right, because this topic is too serious to kind of dabble around. So that's one of the things. And on the innovation side, Stuart made a point that water biodiversity is at risk, and of course agriculture plays a huge role in that. So let me pick up that topic for a second. When you look at both crop protection and fertilizers, we have to innovate in order to reduce the pressure of those inputs on water. In the area of fertilizers, digital applications that reduce the runoff because it's more efficient use of fertilizers, biological alternatives to fertilizers are huge opportunities. And when it comes to crop protection, a good proxy to measure the environmental impact is the effect of certain crop protection products on water. And I think we have to move to a place where those crop protection products that have much less of an impact on water are used around the world, and not only in the rich countries that have like regulations. Currently, we have this split that there are some parts of the world who I think have really innovated in the space, but there's a lot of very old chemistry sold in the rest of the world, and we don't need to do that. We know how to distinguish some of the crop protection products, and also we know how to more effectively apply them. And then the last point, Melinda, is the seed topic. We need to prepare plans for the changing environment. Climate change is currently on track to wipe out 10% of our productivity in agriculture. And that is if we are successful in reducing carbon emissions close to 1.5 degrees. It's going to be much more if we are, like we have to fear at the moment, are not successful. So how to prepare seeds for that situation, how to ensure that plants are much more resilient to the changing climate, which of course drought is a very important part of, but also salination is a very important part of. That is something we have to pay much more attention to.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I saw Stuart nodding there. So let me go to you, Stuart. And first of all, I'd love to hear more about what you are doing with companies. I mentioned Nestlé, but I know that you're working in an advisory capacity with other corporations as well. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that work, about what's possible, about where you also see limits or challenges, and then maybe give us a few concrete examples if you can. Don't have to name names, but I think we'd all be very interested to know what that work looks like.
Sure. So again, it's been almost 2 decades since I started working with the private sector on water issues. And in the early days, it was really the food and beverage guys. They were coming to us because they were starting to understand, they were starting to experience in many places that they were running out of water. And it was early impacts from climate. It was early impacts from poor water management. And then, of course, their factories were also being hit. So it wasn't just the agricultural supply chain, it was also the facilities. From then, conversations went into the mining sector. And I found the mining sector to be quite interesting because their their direct use and impacts on water were very acute. And they were able to throw a lot of money at the problem as well. And then, of course, talking to the clothing and apparel sectors and more and more. And so it's grown over the years, and you learn obviously a lot from hearing from the companies and what they experience. You know, many years ago now, it must be 12, 15 years ago, I was approached by a bunch of investors at a conference who said, you know, we really need to be able to visualize this risk better. And that was the beginning of us coming up with a tool that is a free online tool called the Water Risk Filter, which has been used by thousands and thousands of companies and investors all over the world. And it allows companies to map out their facilities across the world with high resolution mapping, with overlays of very different issues, regulatory, reputational, and physical kinds of risks, biodiversity connections, et cetera, et cetera. We found that tool has really been a way for us to really guide a conversation with a company so that we can get them on the right strategic path to prioritize what their real issues are, to understand what the right interventions are, and to plot out a strategy that makes sense. Now, obviously, we don't have partnerships with all those companies. We're pretty picky with who we have partnerships with, but we do advise a great number of companies. My team has grown over the years to quite a large stewardship team inside of WWF who continue to do really great work with companies on standards, on science-based targets, on collective action partnerships, as well as just giving them water strategy tips. We've worked with CocaCola over the years. I don't mind naming names. They were a great partner. They did a tremendous amount of work on trying to understand their water use and source water protection work. Their replenish strategies, for us, that meant great projects and opportunities. I do a lot of work with Anheuser-Busch, who I find a very progressive company in understanding their water risk and challenges. But we work with the clothing and apparel sector, probably more than anybody right now is with the clothing and apparel, because on the one side, they have the cotton production, and on the other side, they've got the second most polluting industry in the world after oil and gas. And so their water impacts, both on a quantity and a pollution side, are extremely acute. And so as you imagine, you know, the physical, reputational, regulatory risks from their operations and their supply chains is extreme.
Very interesting. Matthias mentioned water pricing, internal prices that corporations adopt for CO2, but also for water. Is that amongst the measures, best practices that you would say, yes, that makes a real difference?
So I've spoken to some companies who have set up sort of shadow pricing inside of companies to try and give themselves a signal of some kind. I think it might help in some way, shape, or form. We did some work some years ago on the value of water with the International Finance Corporation, where we laid out a whole set of steps that we felt that companies should take in actually better internalizing the full cost of their water inside their company. So I think that there are steps like that need to be taken for sure. The price of water is a very controversial issue, and Matthias knows this very, very well. I mean, there's a reason that there is no price for water at a global level. It is a resource that isn't just an input to agriculture or the economy. It's a human right. It's a social good. It's an environmental need. And aggregating all of those values up to a single price has never been achieved. There's no country on the planet today that balances supply and demand through price. And so we kind of have Adam Smith's paradox of value, which he stated in 1776, which was, you know, diamonds command a much higher price in the market, even though they're far less valuable and useful than, say, something like water. That paradox remains unresolved to this day. We have to find other ways to value this resource, and we can't continue to use the excuse that because water is cheap, it doesn't matter. That is fundamentally a huge mistake.
If you would, say a little bit more about, if you are going to advise a company like Bayer, what would you want to see them do first? What is the single most important thing that a big agricultural company, for example, needs to be contemplating?
Right. I think that there's two sides of the coin. I mean, you can only talk about risk so long before you have to talk about opportunity. So companies like Bayer and other companies like them, on the one hand, do have to understand what their impact and their footprint and their dependence on water is globally. Undoubtedly, they are in need of things like the water risk filter as much as any other company. On the flip, they have solutions and opportunities for us to address some of these challenges and work with farmers and governments around the world. I would suggest that the role of companies and I'm not just singling out Bayer, like them, has to extend, though, into the public policy realm. We have to have a stronger voice from companies speaking to governments about the importance of the better management of water. It can't just be about efficiencies, and it can't just be about a little bit of tweaking of tech here and a bit of tweaking of tech there. We need to have a much broader conversation about what is the role of corporations and making sure that we can advocate for and support better governance of these systems. Because at the end of the day, most of these challenges come down to the decisions we make at a river basin level about allocating water.
Let me go back to Matthias and get a response from you to that, if you would. I saw you nodding when Stuart talked about the water filter initiative. And so maybe you can say a few words about also Bayer's take on that, and whether, in fact, the company is fully aware of all the undoubtedly very complex ways that it is using water. So a word on that, and then a word also, if you would, about how you can perhaps work with policymakers, as Stuart just suggested.
Yeah, I think that Stuart's work has contributed to water being seen as the single biggest risk for companies and corporations at the annual business risk report of the World Economic Forum for almost a decade. And that kind of describes the dilemma. So it's like the single biggest risks, and then suddenly it's not really that much talked about. Yeah. So this is like, I mean, humans are kind of funny in that way. Yeah? But like artificial intelligence would have figured out that probably more focus on water would be helpful, but human intelligence not necessarily. So that is it's really important to just be clear about it. I would say it helped us to no longer be water blind. But there is still a lot of short-sightedness. So we need to look at water as a 20, as a 30, as a 50-year topic, and not as a 1, 2, 3-year topic. So that is where we are currently kind of stuck, or where we are working. Laura, who is from Spain, which of course is a country that suffers water shortages in Europe, like many at the Mediterranean kind of sea. She is helping us to kind of really have a comprehensive view on both all the risks and all the opportunities. And that's what companies have to work on. The work on climate change and decarbonization, as important as it is, consumes so much energy that you need to make a conscious effort to add water to that mix. And that's what we are currently doing. Yeah.
Stuart, please, you wanted to say something.
I agree so much with what Matthias has just said there. I think that we are in a dangerous spot right now, Melinda, and I think Matthias has alluded to it a couple of times. I feel like the entire environmental agenda has not only been taken over by climate change, it's been taken over by carbon. And just to insert water into the conversation is a Herculean effort at sometimes. I'm looking at some of the pre-COP readings that is coming through across my desk on the agricultural discussions. I don't see the word water written there once. It's as if the objective of global agriculture now is just to capture carbon in the soil. And we've forgotten actually that there are many, many other things we need to achieve with agriculture, including food security. And we need to consider the other side of the coin. So I don't want to demean the idea of net zero, not at all, but we have a flip story to that, which is resilience and adaptation. And we cannot forget that side of this story going forward. So I fully agree with Matthias. We've got to make sure that we are having a balanced conversation and a numerate and literate conversation about the relationship between climate, water, soils, agriculture. It's very, very important.
That's fascinating. Matthias, you wanted to speak to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to also kind of go back to the companies that Stuart mentioned and the sectors. What's striking is all of them have an agricultural raw material at their core, or of course, in the case of a Nestlé and a CocaCola or Anheuser-Busch, also directly water. So in a way, Bayer as a company and the ag input sector was always part of these discussions. But again, we don't do that as value chains. Yeah, we support our customers in a way that then enables to solve some of the fundamental problems that you work on with branded goods companies in the consumer goods sector. And that's we have to, like in climate, move much more into the territory of value chains to solve this problem. So cotton, huge demand for water, obviously, in cotton. What can we do to reduce that? Also, huge demand for crop protection, insecticides. What can we do to reduce the pressure on water systems coming from that? We can talk about corn. How do you create more drought-resistant varieties in corn? We are currently developing a corn that is roughly half the size of a normal corn, so short corn. Has huge benefits in terms of water consumption needs. Very important in the Midwest of the United States, very important in part of Mexico, but also in the southern part of Brazil and in Argentina. We can talk rice as another example. We have to shift from like the traditional paddy rice to dry seeded rice in order to be much more resilient against droughts, and we get the added benefit of less methane emissions coming with that process. These are the innovations we need to mobilize at scale in order to reduce the exposure to water shortages that otherwise would wreak havoc in those value chains.
Thank you very much. I'd like to shift us to talk a little bit about how you work with policymakers at different levels. And in fact, I'd like to do that in the context of the Dushanbe conference, which is upcoming. So after the first Dushanbe Water Action Decade Conference in 2018, this will be the second meeting that will take place in June. And it focuses on how various stakeholders, including international organizations, the private sector, and civil society can catalyze water action to meet key water-related goals, such as the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So Stuart, talk to us a little bit, if you would, about your hopes and expectations in conjunction with this very, very important conference. And for those who don't know it, what can be achieved at that level, and what has to be done at other levels as well?
Yeah, indeed. So to give context, the government of Tajikistan, along with the government of the Netherlands, have become the champions within the UN system of driving the water action. This is a pre-meeting to the UN Water Conference that will be held in New York City in March next year, which will be the first water meeting I think the UN has held in almost 40 years. And so this is really one of those pre-meets going into that. The conversations have already started. There's already been a number of meetings, including one here in Geneva. And so what I hope to achieve out of this is to continue to make sure that the things that I believe are important are on the agenda, ecosystems and biodiversity. But of course, we have a lot of experience on the nature-based solutions track, on the climate adaptation track, on the water allocation, irrigation. There's a number of different groups and conversations we need to have. So I have great hopes for it. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's an important meeting. Of course, we know a lot of the people who go to these. I think we come together on this kind of agenda, particularly around the idea of valuing water. And so I think it's a really important meeting going forward. My one fear is, and I think this is something that goes into the water sector, is that the water sector can be very siloed. You know, you get your water and sanitation people over there, you get your agriculture people over there, you get people who work with ecosystems and biodiversity here, and then you get a whole bunch of other people over there who make pipes and taps and desalination units, and never the twain shall meet sometimes. And I think that what we need to be doing is taking a bit of a step. I think the UN Food Systems Summit was very interesting to me because I like the term system. I think we need to start thinking about water more in a systems way. I don't think it's a small word or a small intent. I think it's a really big move for our water sector. We need to be coming together at a very crucial time. We've got to break down some of the silos. We've got to start seeing the connections, and we've got to start coming up with solutions that are no regrets, because I tell you, with this climate change breathing down our necks, we don't have the time to make big mistakes. Yeah.
But Stuart, you mentioned it yourself, a lot of experts who already know each other. Many would say essentially it's a forum for those who are the converted, those who already know about the water crisis and the importance of water. How can such a gathering nonetheless change the way we see water, break through that water blindness? Do you think it really can reach the broader public?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think the communication of water is lacking. I think you're absolutely right there. I think that the water sector, certainly the areas that I work in, have been very reflective over the last few years of saying, are we getting our message out there? Is the problem us here? Is the reason that we're not getting this on the agenda down to the way in which we're framing things? So in one sense, the Dushanbe conference isn't necessarily the conference to let the world know about water, but I do think that it is the way for us to organize ourselves as we go forward to New York. I see so many opportunities arising where that message is going to get out there through so many different channels. So I see them as slightly separate, Melinda, but I understand your point.
And Matthias, basically a similar question to you, because of course the UN Water Conference that Stuart mentioned in 2023, that also potentially is an opportunity to drive that broader message and try to reach the public. But of course, skeptics often say such meetings are elaborate talking shops. So how do you personally see the role of and the need for action at multilateral level?
Well, there is a lot of talk about that globalization is kind of reaching kind of its end. The bad news is the global problems don't care. And if we want to solve these problems, we need to talk. And of course, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, people go like, oh, can we really make progress on the multilateral level, on the UN level, on a topic like water, or dare I say, like climate? And I feel we have to try. Unfortunately, that involves a lot of talking. But also, fortunately, it involves a lot of talking. Yeah, because we will not be able to dictate solutions to problems like climate or water. We can only do that by bringing along broad and ever broader coalitions. For me, the opportunity we have between now and March of next year, when the high-level conference on water will be held, is that the water topic becomes a central topic in all the events lining up to that. That includes the Stockholm Water Week in a few weeks. It includes the UN General Assembly in September. It certainly also includes COP27, which is hosted by Egypt this year. So we have to really try to build momentum for the topic. And I know that organizations that have done great work in driving awareness of the climate crisis, like the World Meteorological Organization that hosts the IPCC, are kind of really determined to make water a topic at those events. And one of the things we're going to do in Dushanbe is we're going to talk about how to influence the final agenda. And the WMO, which is the UN kind of acronym for the World Meteorological Organization, the WMO says, look, guys, one thing we need for sure is predictive tools. We can predict droughts, we can predict floods, but we don't do that consistently around the world. And therefore, it's a huge equity challenge. There are many countries that are not able to prepare for that, because we don't have the systems in place. Sounds like a techie thing, but it's essential for us to solve the water crisis, to have access to that data and to predict the challenges, not dissimilar to what the climate researchers have done with climate change. That is the first step, but then we need to be much faster in starting to act. So we don't need to fall in the same trap I've seen us falling into in the climate debate of analysis paralysis. And that's where the business community comes in. We need to act on the water crisis as a business community. And I hope it's much more a dialogue and much less the typical kind of classic front lines of NGOs versus business, some governments against other governments. I hope water could become a much more uniting topic and still be interesting also for the media, which is one of the problems. Everybody goes like, yeah, water is important, let's move on. Yeah.
I must say that as a lawyer, I've looked at the issue of conflict over water, the so-called coming water wars, and one sees examples of water driving cooperation, certainly, but one sees a lot of examples of water essentially becoming the heart of conflict. I see Stuart nodding at that. Perhaps you want to say a word?
No, it's just something I've done research on, and I totally agree with you. I think there's a tendency, though, and I think your point is important. It's also a place where collaboration happens. So even in those places where you don't think it's possible, we can come to agreements. Yeah.
And in fact, I'm seeing an audience comment coming in saying we need integrated water resource management in our government rules. Clearly, exactly that same notion that we have to have a holistic, systemic perspective. Just in terms of driving awareness, let me ask both of you about an initiative that both of your organizations are involved in. So amongst those who say the international community is doing too much talking and not enough acting is Mina Guli, an Australian athlete and environmental activist. She was mentioned a little while ago. And for the purposes of her Run Blue campaign, she's going to be running 200 marathons around the world until the start of the UN Water Conference in 2023 with support from Bayer and, as I understand it, also with the WWF amongst the corporate partners supporting Run Blue. So perhaps both of you can talk a little bit about what you're hoping that campaign can achieve. Stuart, first, please.
Well, Mina Guli is a force of nature. She's a wonderful woman. I've known her for a long time, and what she does is incredible. Now, I'm very happy to be associated with what Mina's doing, and I think, you know, it's to your point, Melinda, about how do we get the message out there. I'm open and excited about any opportunity that we can to drive the water message out there, and Mina is a highly effective person to do that. She has a great following. She is determined. Unfortunately, Matthias and I are going to have to do a fun run with her in Dushanbe next Saturday. She told me the other day while she was running on her phone. But no, I think that what she's doing is incredibly important. And I think that the stories that we can tell as she goes to each country, and each country presents itself with different stories about water, too much, too little, agricultural stories versus industrial, human stories versus biodiversity. It's going to be a fascinating campaign. As you say, she's already many runs into this already. We're going to support her as she runs across the world and enters into countries where we have offices, and we're going to be doing joint campaign work with her. We're doing large fund runs. So on World Water Day, which is just in a couple, World Water Run, which is just in a couple of days, you know, we will be mobilizing people in over 170 countries to run together to raise awareness. So anything that brings awareness to water, count me in.
Wow, very cool. Matthias, tell us about Bayer's side.
Be happy if we were not running out of water, but walking out of water. But unfortunately, the crisis is so intense that we actually have to run. And the 200 marathons, Melinda, are 200 in a year.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So it means there are a few days where Mina kind of takes a rest. She has been in Australia. She's now in Central Asia. It's unfortunate because China is one of those countries where Mina lived that is like ground zero of the water crisis as well, that she wasn't able to run in China. But what we hope is that the thing that Mina as a person is really great at, and that is uniting people behind the water topic, is something that also inspires a bit of that well beyond the community of experts. And I've been talking to people who are employed at Bayer, but also other folks who contacted me who were just inspired by the stories you can follow on social media. She is also one of the few people that kind of says, you know what, you may all be contributing to the problem one way or another, but I really don't care as long as you are seriously working on moving the ball forward. So she has a level of pragmatism and a level of openness to uncommon collaboration that the water topic in my book needs. So we're going to see her. It's going to be a fun run for her. I already know what it's going to be for me, but that's a topic for another conversation.
I would like to bring in a few audience questions, if I may, at this point in time. And here is one intriguing one coming from Sayed Kashif, who asks, This is just a basic question, but it's been in my mind for quite a while. Where is the water going, essentially, if it's becoming scarce? Is it going out of the ecosystem? Who would like to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. I'll give that a whirl. You know, we're dealing with about the same amount of water on the planet that we had, 100,000 years ago. It's not exactly one of these things that we destroy in the same way. But if you understand the water cycle of evaporation, precipitation, rainfall, capture, et cetera, the water is constantly moving into that water cycle. So when we say water is becoming scarce, it becomes that it's a combination of things. The nature is putting water back faster or slower than it used to in places that it didn't used to, and it will in the future, right? Everything is changing. But of course, we take water out of the environment more than we've ever done. So we are diverting and blocking and draining and polluting water at a rate that creates situations of scarcity around the world. And of course, you add that to the global water cycle, and you start to have these disruptions of too much water, too little, wrong place, wrong time kind of story. The fact that people live under situations of water scarcity just means that the water endowment in those places is decreasing because of overuse, because of changes in climate, because of poor allocation rules. A lot of countries are running out of water simply because we're not making the right choices about how to share it. We're not reallocating our agricultural allocations. We're not having the hard conversations about what should and what should not get water in our economy. We're not having the proper conversations about what ecosystems we need to protect, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not disappearing anywhere. It's just that we are adding more and more pressure to freshwater systems around the world, more for energy, more for food, more for cities, more for industry. And unfortunately, even in developed economies, we're returning that water to the environment in degraded states that are shameful. I mean, the rates of sewage dumping in European countries into our river systems is appalling. So it's a situation where we are just not stewarding this resource in the way we need to. And that, along with all the pressures I've described, underpinned by poor governance and poor decision making and lack of investment by governments, et cetera, et cetera. The list is long, Melinda, but it all adds up and creates scarcity.
I would like to add one point,
please, Matthias.
One point to it. We have seen in Pakistan, of course, also in India, and other element of the water crisis that like wet bulbs create like this extreme heat situations. And then what happened is a melting of the cryosphere of glaciers leading to huge flooding in Pakistan. And the cryosphere is a non-renewable resource when we look at human lifetime. So yes, in the long run, it might renew itself again, but the loss of cryosphere is also equivalent to the loss of fresh water. So the NASA and the German DLR have like a mission called the GRACE mission, which allows us to measure the amount of water at any place on the planet. It's a very, very cool initiative, but it produces a very scary result. In many places where a lot of people are living, the amount of water that's available is and usable is depleting at a very scary pace. That will lead to all kinds of problems, including migration. You talked already about the water conflicts earlier. So it's not as renewable as we always think. So I think there are two things that I don't like in the water debate. This idea that there is this water cycle and it's already the perfect cycle, it's not. Yeah. And the other idea I don't like is to think about water as a local problem. And I give you an example why I say that. Almost 78% of all water in Burkina Faso stems from forests in East Africa. So you have a country in West Africa that arguably doesn't have a lot of water. But decisions in East Africa decide on whether there will be precipitation or not. This is a much more global problem than we care to admit in the debate. And we have to, as Stuart said, we have to think about this as a systems problem and not as a local problem. It expresses itself in different ways on local level, but the overall systematic challenge is much more global than the water debate sometimes cares to admit.
Just in terms of what both of you have said about pressure on water, let me bring in a question from Christopher Barry Ward, who says, while all of this is important to discuss water usage and use to enable better food supply, water is an immediate problem with increasing urbanization. Anybody care to say a word about that? Stu, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the urban challenges around water are immense as well. The water in and the water out, absolutely. I think over the last few years, we've seen, a number of stories about Cape Town running out of water, or Istanbul hitting the wall on water, Chennai. It's a serious issue at different levels. Yes, you have the rural agricultural story, but you also have this incredible urban story, and they come together. You look in the American West, you've got the conversation about agriculture in the American West and Las Vegas keeping the lights on, right? So I mean, so there's undoubtedly, again, this comes back to what I said about there's going to be some hard decisions that need to be made. I think that on the urban side, there's amazing work that's being done around urban nature-based solutions, urban water retention. A lot of cities are investing tremendous amounts of money in protection of watersheds and, of course, in infrastructure. But not enough is being done. I mean, without a doubt, if you look at cities around the world, the infrastructure is aging, the cost is extremely high. The tariff system of charging for water is usually inverse of the scarcity because it's such a politicized question. There are so, I mean, I do think that a number of cities, and we do track this. Actually, we put some statistics together with the water risk filter not long ago, looking at some of the greatest cities at risk from water issues. It's pretty scary. But this is where a great deal of investment is going to have to take place on a number of issues. And of course, that's just the water quantity. The water quality coming out of cities and urban areas is just mostly appalling. So there's a tremendous amount to do. But of course, everything I've just said there should be an economic opportunity. And I think, Melinda, if I can shoehorn one thing into this whole conversation, is the people that I feel are missing from this whole conversation are the investors. They continue to not ask companies the right questions about water. They continue to want exceptional returns on investment. For all of this talk of blended finance and all of these different things, I'm not seeing the money show up to really try to solve these problems. There are tremendous investments and profits to be made out of wastewater, sewage, and water supply systems. And yet I don't see the capital flowing into these things as much as we should. We need to turn these into opportunities. And I think the private sector has a strong role to play here in helping to leverage and to facilitate that conversation. But the investors really need to step up on the water challenge.
And interesting that you say that, because in fact, we also have a question here about the role of CFOs, who of course are the investors when it comes to companies themselves. Matthias, the question reads as follows: sustainability directors often understand water risks and opportunities and talk about the right responses, but just as often, CEOs and CFOs are not so involved or committed. How do we change that?
I think First of all, I've talked to a lot of business leaders over my 15 years in the business community, and it has been a generational change. Many of them are worried about the topic. We shouldn't be, as always, like inclusion and diversity. There's also a bit of a need of inclusion and diversity here. So there's much more awareness today than 10 or 15 years ago, and we should really embrace that rather than kind of sticking to a narrative where that isn't the case. But if you, as a CFO or as a CEO, want to drive change in your organization, you need to work on internal pricing. You need to look at the innovation budgets of company. Are we actually inventing the future we want to have, or are we not doing that? Innovation budgets are often underestimated. The $5.5 billion that we invest in the space, plus some adjacent investments, is something I kind of obsess a lot about. And then what also helps is incentives. We've seen that in the carbon debate, and I feel the invisible hand of the market turned a bit greener as we introduce those incentives. It can also turn a bit blue if we add water to the mix.
Thank you. Very nice. And in fact, just because you mentioned innovation, let me just say that I know Bayer does have a social innovation award that you've launched with the goal of sparking innovation solutions including in the area of reuse and purification of water, especially to boost access for underserved communities. So just to our audience, if you by any chance are a startup or have an innovation that could be a solution to scarcity, drought, or contamination, I think you need to write to Bayer and ask them about this Social Innovation Award. I don't know if you want to add something to that, Matthias, but that was my public service announcement here.
Yeah, not much to add other than the one thing we learned in focusing on water is we need a lot of help from others with cool ideas. So I talked to a lot of innovators in the space. Again, bright spots. Yeah, we talked about a huge problem here, but there are bright spots, people who are able to introduce desalination, solar powered at small scale that is currently active, people who are able to introduce also water systems for smallholders. I've seen participants from Israel on this call. How can we transfer a lot of the work that is done in Israel on water efficiencies to other parts of the world really quickly? And these innovators are really, really what the large companies need. And obviously, like many others, through our investment funds, through the Social Innovation Award, we try to attract them.
And let me just ask both of you very briefly, if you would. I clearly hear a lot of synchronicity in many of the things that you're saying. How do you see the work between corporations and NGOs? Is it fruitful, or what does it take to make it fruitful? And is there are we sort of getting out of the adversarial boxes that perhaps NGOs and industry used to get stuck in? Stuart?
Yeah. I think NGOs are a spectrum, right? I think some play a very important and critical role in being the aggressive NGO to companies. And I actually don't think that hurts. I think it's quite actually very helpful sometimes, because sometimes companies only move once they get a really serious kick. I mean, I think we play a role of critical friend with a lot of companies, and we've made that decision a long time ago. And I think that we see an important role for bringing our skills and perspectives and understanding and connections and connections to the ground, because we are located in so many countries with local people in those watersheds that we know the local context. There's a great deal that we can do with companies. It's not to say that there aren't times when there aren't big disagreements, without a doubt. There are sometimes, and you get through them. But I think it's absolutely crucial. I don't think we are, I'm not one of those people that thinks we're in a position where you can start to have people that aren't talking about this together. You need to talk to everybody about this. And even though, it doesn't matter what sector, we've got to solve these problems. If we are sharing a resource in a river basin somewhere and we've got a problem to solve, then you need to talk to everybody. So I don't think we can be too precious about it.
Thank you. Matthias?
If business does the wrong thing, then there will be NGOs holding us accountable. And I think we have to live with that. We are not perfect. Now, we have seen NGOs are also not perfect. But the one thing that I found encouraging in the Edelman Trust Barometer data that measures public trust, that both NGOs and business are now seen in this sweet spot of seeing both as more capable and also more responsible in the way they operate. So both are more trusted right now. And I think the better we work together, the more that will embrace public trust in the solutions we come up with. So I'm quite optimistic about that.
Thank you very much. And that's a good answer to the last audience question that has come in, which is from Björn Dinges. And it's, are you looking optimistic or pessimistically into the future? Also, Stuart says optimistic as well. I would like to ask both of you just literally in one sentence or maybe two, if you don't mind, because time is more or less up. But I would like for you to tell us, all of us in the audience, what is the single most important thing that you think we can do as individuals or within our communities? What would you want to see us do when it comes to overcoming water blindness? Stuart?
Wow. I think the important thing is that everybody has a role in this. Nobody should feel disempowered by the challenges we face. Everybody has a voice as a consumer, as a citizen. as an NGO, as a business, I think we all have to take, and I do put my thumbs up because we are optimistic. I do see a great deal of people wanting to solve this problem. And I think the more that people can get on board, learn about water, understand the issues, and be part of a productive effort to solve them, the better. That's more than 2 sentences. Sorry, Melinda.
Thank you so much, Matthias.
We have seen the worst deforestation in a very, very long time last year, and the data indicates we are not on a good trajectory in 2022 either. I believe the one area that is both necessary for reducing the pressures of climate change and improving water supply, increasing soil moisture in many parts of the world, is to remember the rain part of rainforest. We need to protect our forests. We made a promise to stop deforestation by 2030. I think we need to accelerate that promise. I have high hopes that there will be a global coalition finally stopping what a generation of environmentalists have been asking the world to do. The Rio conference was in 1992, 30 years ago. We have to stop deforestation. That's the single one thing everybody who cares about water should rally around.
Thank you very, very much. So once again, linking that up to that larger systemic perspective, I very much appreciate both of you taking part in this talk and your perspectives and insights that you have shared with us, which I think certainly do help to raise, hopefully, the water awareness of all who have listened to you. And by the way, those who have listened to us today come from countries ranging from Argentina, Israel, Spain, Pakistan, Brazil, Mexico, Nigeria, Indonesia, Italy, and more. So we've had a very, very broad audience here with us for this fascinating dialogue. Many thanks to both of you, and thanks as well to our audience for dialing in from all around the globe. We're very grateful for your attention and your contributions, and we hope to see you again soon, dear ladies and gentlemen, maybe in exactly a month from now, when we will conduct our next LinkedIn Live talk with one of the world's leading experts on agriculture. Until then, I wish everybody to stay healthy and safe, and good luck on that run in Dushanbe, Matthias and Stuart. Great to see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.